Hello and welcome. I'm Lee Peterson. I'm your host of the weekly podcast, WDcast. And it's called WDcast because it's brought to you by WD Partners, who are thinkers that do. And they are thinkers that do because they do strategy, design, operations, all the way to architecture and construction management, the whole gamut. And so these casts are all about relevant business topics of today. So pretty general, but we kind of like it that way. And what we want to talk about are what we call burning platforms. What are the issues that today and nowadays in retail and in the business world in general, there's a lot to talk about. Today, I just have to say, today we are with the always interesting Adam Ferguson. He's an SVP with Huntington National Bank. Hello, Adam.
Hello, Lee.
And before we get started, I just like a little bit of a disclaimer. The thoughts and opinions that you hear today are ours, are Adam's and mine, and not necessarily those of WD Partners and Huntington National Bank. It's a good thing I said that, right, Adam?
Very good, yes. These are personal opinions.
Okay, so before we get started, Adam, would you mind telling everybody what it is you do and maybe just a little background on yourself?
Sure, yeah. I, as the brand director at Huntington, my job is to figure out the bank's position within the marketplace and how to make the story distinctive. So I spend a lot of time thinking about people and money and their relationship with money. And I try to find an authentic way to connect what's unique about the Huntington DNA to what they're up against. So half of my job is, that strategy, and then the other half is the creative storytelling. I need to find ways to tell the Huntington story, but also tell, the value that we're trying to bring to the world. Tell it in ways that get their attention and bring them in and get them off the couch to ask questions of us. By way of background, most of my career was in advertising, so I grew up outside of New York City and spent my first decade in the professional world working at ad agencies.
Interesting.
Yeah, lots of different clients, not financial services by any means. Quick service restaurants, some carbonated beverages, packaged goods, which is interesting. That's the interesting thing about advertising is that all these different client worlds, all these different industries, all these different customer experiences. So it gives you a really good opening volley into the world of communication.
Yeah, it's similar to what we do. And I'll never forget one time we were working with Gatorade, and we had a kickoff meeting, and at the kickoff meeting was a lot of really smart people on it. At the end of it, I said, I just have to tell you, if you guys got together and you weren't selling colored water, you could probably solve world hunger. And everybody laughed, but I felt like it was true. It was a lot of smart people.
Exactly right.
And, to your point about carbonated beverages, that could be a plethora of things. How'd they talk you into moving here?
Oh, true love. That's the only thing that ever gets people to really move. My wife and I met in college, and she's a Columbus, Ohio native. And when we were ready to have children, it absolutely made a lot more sense than the New York City metro area.
Yeah, God.
Yeah.
Unless you want to live in Queens.
Even then.
Even then, that's true. Okay, so Adam, we recently did a panel called Why Stores at a conference, which was just 2 weeks ago, which feels like a month ago already. But in that, there was a lot of interesting questions about stores. So in other words, the topic itself, like why stores, is relevant in that we know that footfalls are down, that a lot of stores are closing. I think more stores have closed through April than did the whole year of 2018. And people just are finding it easier to shop online. And what's interesting is everybody on the panel, including yourself, you have what you call branches. They have what they call stores, which is pretty much the same thing. They're visited by people. There's interactions with people there. There's, money exchanged, if you will. So I thought you had a lot of terrific answers at the conference, and that's why you're here. But could you just elaborate a little bit on why you think branches are still important today?
Yeah. Well, money itself is complex for everyone. Even the people with a great deal of money still stay up at night thinking about money. It's a source of anxiety. It's a source of it's a never-ending question. Will I have enough? Is the rest of my life going to be the way I envision it? So that's really the business that banks are in, or should be. How do we help people understand the question and then understand the answer, or find the best answer for them? When it comes to stores, typically if you go back 50, 100 years, the way the bank branch worked was it was a place of transaction. I need to get money, I need to give you money, I need to move money around. That was when paper was really important to currency. Obviously, it's not anymore. So the big question, what the internet has done, what the digitization of capitalism has done, is disrupt every industry. And with the banking industry, the question is, well, why do we need branches anymore? There's no paper currency to have these transactions.
Yeah, exactly.
So what the industry is wrestling with right now, and what they're trying to do is figure out what to do with all this real estate. And a lot of banks are closing down branches at rapid rates. They're keeping the urban ones open because there's more people around,
Foot traffic.
more pedestrian traffic, more potential. And what that does is basically creates a billboard and a place where, for those that are still hanging on to the branch experience, a place to go. But a lot of the ex-urban and the rural branches are closing down. So it's an expense save for banks, but the thing that I'm interested in is the potential for what branches could become. If we stop thinking about them as places of transaction and start thinking about them as a reinvention, what do they become? So a great example might be, if somebody comes in at a point in their life where they're like, okay, I'm ready to start a family, and I know there's money questions and money answers, and I'm not sure where to go from here. The typical response today would be, let's open a savings account for you because you need to put away a lot of money and babies are expensive. But the value that we could be adding could be significant. The banker could say, okay, the first year of starting a family is quantifiable. What we understand is the biggest expense is going to be daycare. So there are options. You have in-home nanny care, you have shared nanny care, you have daycare centers. In this region that you live in, there's an approximate cost monthly that we can apply to each figure which one is right for you. Now what the banker has done is they've created extra value. They've shown them a path forward that they didn't have when they walked in. So all of a sudden the store experience adds more value. Now, could they get that by going to Google? Absolutely. But the problem with Google is it's 20 million responses and you're not sure which one to trust.
Page 28.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So from a banking perspective, what we're trying to do is create a brand that can be trusted for questions and answers. And then that human contact, that guide experience of walking me through the problems, is essential with something as anxiety producing as money. A lot of times we need a coach, someone who knows more than me. So that's one answer to the branch conundrum.
To me, there's a kind of an obvious direct correlation with what's happening in retail. So there's, quote unquote, I read something interesting in HBR the other day about the disruption doesn't come from technology, it comes from the customer.
Mm-hmm.
the customer is the one that wants all these things done differently. And so most businesses asked in this interview by HBR said, well, it's a technology disrupted our business. But in fact, the customer wanted something different from them the whole time.
Right.
And one of the things that we have been talking about too in terms of the correlation, is these things here, and I'm holding up my cell phone or my smartphone, and the sort of mentality that they've created where I get anything I want from that. So I can get a bank account from that.
Mm-hmm.
I can buy a shirt from that. I can buy a pair of shoes. I can go to Spain. I can contact my kids. I can contact my mom. I can send a video to somebody. I can watch a video. I can do all these things on here. So they're kind of like anything engines. And we're sort of used to that. So now I know anything I want is right here.
Mm-hmm.
But when you go to a store or a branch, they're still kind of one-dimensional. So even, the things that you were talking about, the services that you were talking about. So you're about to have kids, and somebody needs to really give you some advice and tell you 2 or 3 things that are going to happen to you. It isn't just moving money around or saving money. It's a lot of different things, right? Do you see eventually banks maybe providing those services so that you become more like one of these and more of an anything engine?
It's a good question. I mean, let me back up a little bit, but the problem with cell phones is that, it's infinite, the
Right.
possibility.
Yeah.
So you've given everyone a Swiss Army knife that does everything. And we may flip through all the tools, but not know what to do, not know what each of them does. So it's that paradox of choice, right? It's that overwhelming, like, I can figure out the answers, I think. But the value that brands are going to bring in the future is having experts in place that can show them exactly what these tools can do. So if there's somebody, let's use the Swiss Army metaphor. If the can opener tool comes out and the can opener tool actually can do 30 things, the person might be able to figure that out by themselves. They might be able to figure out 3 or 4. But what an expert can do is show you the 30 to 40 things that they don't know. And you need that guidance, So when it comes to money, I think banks are going to have to think a lot harder about the value that they're adding. They're going to have to expand their services beyond just money management into life management. I think that there are lots of strategies into that question, and the bank that figures it out is going to be victorious. I don't know that any have figured it out yet.
Yeah. Well, in terms of the technology disruptors or the disruptors that the customers want to see, some of the simple transactions is the question I think you have to ask yourself about the physical units. The simple transactions I can just do online without an expert. I want to put some money in checking. I want to, send somebody, want to pay a bill. I'm going to do this and I want to do that. But the complicated things are almost impossible, to do unless you talk to a person. And so do you see that as kind of the like you're saying, you have the can opener.
Right.
So just like some retailers are thinking right now, like Apple, like I was noticing Apple, somebody sent me something about the things you can get at Apple. I don't know have you seen that at all?
No.
Bicycle helmet, jump rope, toothbrush, you name it, you can get it at Apple. So they're starting to become more like an anything engine, and you just go to Apple and you can buy all this stuff because you sort of trust the brand.
Right.
Do you see bank branches moving in that direction?
I don't. I mean, I think that's an experiment in, the Walmartization of the world. I think that it sounds like Apple's getting a little cocky,
Expanding the permission.
Yeah, you have to understand, what your brand is really good at, and dig further into what that means. Dental hygiene and Apple just don't connect for me. But I'd love to see what an Apple toothbrush looks like.
It looks really nice.
Does it? I think some of the magic is in the data, and it's funny because I'm a kind of a creative background, so for me to say this is interesting. But if you looked at, so let's take Joel. I'm going to make some assumptions about you, Joel. 27-year-old. Okay, close. 27, 28-year-old, no kids, lives in this zip code, probably in a cool, hip urban area, and rents, but is aspiring to have a car. So now we understand a little bit of data about Joel. When we enter that into a system and start to pull up people like Joel, we can understand financially they look like this. They've got approximately this much debt and approximately this much in deposits and approximately this much saved for retirement at this point in their lives. They should be saving at this rate. So we can start to see what people like Joel look like, right? So the banker can crawl into that data and show you a scientific look at Joel. And now we can say, to get true health, true financial health out of this equation, we're going to need to do certain things. So we want to squeeze your debt down a little bit, and we're going to do that by pulling some of the liquid savings you have over here to accommodate for that debt. And then the rest of the liquid we're going to push over into retirement because you actually need to save at a higher clip. And now all of a sudden, like that, the experience that you're getting from that brand is much more valuable. So do I think we as a bank, do I think banks need to expand beyond what they do well? No, but I think they need to look at the customer and look at the potential for helping that customer and expand what they do now to be much greater. And the store equation, the reason stores are so important is because you need the time to sit with someone, consult with them, and open this conversation up. It's not a fun conversation. If it's your health or your money, there's anxiety involved. So you want to sit down with someone who knows their stuff and who can open up questions and answers and provoke a conversation, because other stuff from you, the consumer, is going to come out of that. And then we're going to have a back and forth and hopefully multiple visits. This is not a one-time thing. You're going to come back with more questions after you've sat and thought about it. So it's a constant, just like your health, it's a constant recalibration and a course correction, your health metrics.
So would you say that stores, branches, have kind of a long way to go to where you want them to be?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think the bar in banking is extremely low.
So then I'll have to ask you a question that I've asked a bunch of retailers and through either projects or this type of thing. How come we're moving so slow?
Quarterly results.
So the tyranny of the immediate?
Well, one of my favorite examples is Jeff Bezos, because for a decade, Wall Street kept yelling at him, "You're not making any money."
Yeah.
And he said, "So what? Watch me." And he just held his cards and he just kept building the company that he wanted to build. And then finally, when he was ready to make money and pay attention to quarterly results, he did. And I don't think a lot of companies have that kind of patience.
Yeah.
I think it's a lot easier when it's 10 guys in a garage. I think it's difficult when you're public and analysts and shareholders are demanding things on a quarterly basis and you feel that pressure. And, you're closer to retirement and have your own, there's that cyclical issue of who's in charge and what's in it for them. And
Yeah, I get that feeling too, where you can see if you're the CEO of a company and you're 62 years old, and you know that there's going to be some really painful change. So it's one thing for Bezos to say it because he's starting from scratch and he's going to wait for it. But I'm the CEO of a company and I look and I'm like, JCPenney, is a great example, I think, where so much change needs to happen. But you don't want that to happen on your watch because you're 62 years old. So you got to keep that stock at a certain price. So you're going to take very, very incremental steps to get there. But it seems to me that there's going to have to, sooner or later, maybe when millennials take over, which I think we were talking about at the panel, there's going to need to be like almost some drastic changes where, the stock price is going to take a tremendous hit, but 5 years from now, you're going to be what you want to be, or even hopefully less.
Yeah, exactly. Or there will be some disruption, some one disruptor that comes along and shows the rest of the world what this industry could become, and then everybody else has to pay attention.
Right. Yeah. One of the best examples of that, and I don't know if I would have said this 15 years ago, though, was Walmart, where I think about 3 years ago, the CEO of Walmart got in front of the New York Stock Exchange and said, we're not going to make any money next year because we're going to reinvest everything we have to try and catch up to the hottest competitors, which he didn't mention at the time, but it was Amazon. Mm-hmm. And their stock took a tremendous hit, and now all the news is like super positive about them. Well, they're doing buy online, pick up in store, right? They're shipping to home. They're competing on price. They're doing everything that they need to do, but they had to first take that step, take a hit. You think that's possible for banks?
I do. Yeah. No, it's definitely possible. It just takes courage, and it takes patience. And it takes a conviction that you know exactly, you understand exactly your brand DNA, and you can see the point on the horizon that you want to get to, and you've got however many people working at the bank, arm in arm, ready to undergo some turbulence.
So, along the same lines, and Walmart has this issue where they have a 900-pound gorilla, that they have to deal with. But you guys also have kind of the Huns at the gates, right? Like they wrote down some of these new neo-banks, mobile free service banking services, right? Like Chime, Aspiration, Vera, I think there are, Empower. What do you think of those guys?
Well, again, let's take it to the health metaphor. So Apple Watches, all those wrist sensors, they now read your data. And I'm sure it's not far from the time when they are collecting blood and DNA and also, looking at your cell makeup and looking for changes. All that data is going to get pumped through to some server somewhere where an algorithm will look it up and then pump back insights about your body. You didn't get enough sleep last night. You've got to get up and walk around. Yeah, that's happening today. I guess the question is, do I need a doctor at that point? Is that enough? Do I trust Skynet enough at that point to just keep spitting back things? Or do I want somebody who's trained in medicine, who can read between the lines and work with me, work alongside me? You can probably scale that offering so that different target audiences can get different experiences. And maybe the same target audiences can get different experiences at different times. Maybe the Apple Watch can be built on by an in-person experience and vice versa. So ultimately, I think that's a hot phrase right now, the humanization of tech. And I think a lot of people say it and they don't know what it means. But I think it's this relationship, this interwoven relationship between physical experiences and digital experiences, and how brands use both to build on each other and make the offering stronger.
Back to those neobanks, one of the things that's happening in retail is sort of the neo-retailers like Warby Parker and Bonobos, and these guys are opening stores when they were pure online players, Casper. Do you see that happening with these neobanks? So that they have the doctors as well?
It hasn't happened yet. As long as money remains completely digital and that trend continues, I don't see one of those neobank brands making that jump. The only experimentation I've seen in physical spaces so far has been Cap One, right? So Capital One starts as a credit card company, and then they start offering, retail banking services, and they open up these branches that are, cafes, and they're mostly coffee shops with a small group of people in blue golf shirts that walk around and try to provoke money conversations. Most of the people that I see there are using the Wi-Fi and the laptops.
Do you think that's a good idea, though, the cafes?
I think it's an idea. It's trying something different, which is not a bad thing. Whether or not it's the ultimate value around the money conversation that people could be having, I think they should have gone further. So I think disrupting the transactional branch experience is great because it's old and dated and doesn't need to be around anymore. But throwing a couple of couches, some, adult rock, and offering coffee makes it a softer experience. But is that really the value that we can be adding? I'm looking more for a workshop, a clinic. I want a place where, my stats can be analyzed, and a path forward can be drawn out for me. I want a place where work is being done, and experts are available. The just offering a casual experience isn't enough. Isn't far along.
That's interesting. You mentioned the doctors. I had to go to a doctor for a reason, and of course, before you do that, you go online and you look up, WebMD, like everybody that you could possibly think of. And when I talked to the doctor, when I got there, and I said, da 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 da, from some of the things I had read online, he goes, "First thing you need to do is stop looking online."
It's the worst.
Do not do that. So what do you see then as the biggest threats to traditional bankers today?
Yeah, that's a good question. People's money habits change very slowly. When they launched credit cards in the 70s, that was supposed to be the death of cash. When plastic came around, and it never happened. People are just slow and careful about money. So in terms of, has there been a tipping point yet? I think direct banks, which are what the industry refers to as, completely digital, completely online banks, are a threat because they have none of the overhead with stores, so they can offer bigger interest rates. And if we're just, scientifically going along with numbers, then that seems pretty attractive. There isn't a huge threat yet in the industry. At least none of the digital banks have really figured out an offering that has created a tipping point.
What about millennials? Or millennials and Gen Z. Basically, when we do our studies now, we separate 29 and under and 45 and over, and because the thought process is just so different. Do you think that people 29 and under are an existential threat or a real threat?
From what we see in our stats, millennials are opening just as many accounts inside branches as their older cohorts are, and part of that. So that's interesting too. Why are they not opening accounts online versus still walking into branches? And I think there's this need to connect with someone. I'm going to hand over my money to you, and I need to trust. I need to look someone in the eye, and at least that first interaction where I'm opening the account, I need to make sure that I'm in a good place. I trust this brand. It's going to be an ongoing relationship. I want to be able to come back and either shake your hand or wring your neck when something happens. But I need to know who it is. The data does hold up. It's interesting that that millennials are not migrating as quickly as we thought to digital.
Super. I would never have predicted that. Okay, I'm going to take you a little bit out of bounds on this one, but can you give us your top 2 or 3 problems of the world today? Forget about banks, or maybe banks is one of them, but what are the biggest sort of business factors that you see right now as burning platforms?
Okay, this is fun.
Finally.
Yeah. No. This has been great. But talking shop. So the one of the biggest issues I always think about is why we still have countries. The the lines drawn seem so arbitrary. I get for thousands of years we had to conquer land and create governments. But I think globally we're facing, climate change is legit. It's kind of like Game of Thrones. I mean, you have like the 5 families of Westeros fighting with each other. Meanwhile, the White Walkers are coming.
Yeah, right.
So that's climate change. And I think that the human race needs to sort of let go of those old lines and come together and treat the earth almost like a business. I mean, who needs food? Mm-hmm. Where can the food be grown optimally? Mm-hmm. How do we get those resources where they need to go? Let's treat it like that. The trouble is who becomes the administrator, right? Then the power grabs come in and play. So that's the number one.
Human nature.
Yeah, that's right. It connects to a lot of different problems. The problem of racism is also really interesting. Martin Luther King had that quote about the human race always makes progress. It's just messy as we get there,
yeah.
So I think that racially, we have made progress in the last 200-300 years, the last 1,000 years. Human rights are getting better, but the problems still exist, and it's not happening fast enough. And it's the same issues of one life is just as important as another life, and why are we not caretaking for all of them? So
it's similar to the borders, really.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right.
And they're across the border, so we're not going to take care of them.
It's weird, and it's weird. It's like a visual thing. That person looks different from me, therefore I can create a barrier. It doesn't make a lot of sense.
Okay, so you get one more. We have borders. We have racism.
And it's really both those two issues boil down into the inability to come together in a way. I do think capitalism is the best system we have so far, but there are a lot of problems with it. And there are stats right now, that are true. I think it's 1% of the global population controls 50% of the money.
It's at least that, isn't it?
It's bananas.
Yeah.
And if you apply it to the U.S., I think it's 1% controls 40%. But 20% of the U.S. population controls 80% of the money. That leaves 80% of the people with only 20% of the money. And there's got to be a way. I don't have the answer on that one, but there's got to be a way to have everyone be able to pursue life, liberty, happiness in a more equal way. I think the haves and the have-not thing, it's growing, the divide.
I'm sure these guys are going to edit this out, but lately I've been spending a lot of time in Scandinavia. I don't know why they like to hear me speak. Go figure. But what I notice they're democratic socialists. So they elect free leaders and whom they consider responsible, or they kick them out, one way or the other. But it's really evident there. There are no poor people. There's no homeless people. There's no ghettos. There's no, shanty towns. There's nothing like that whatsoever. And there's nobody riding around in Ferraris and Lamborghinis and stuff like that, living in these massive mansions. Everybody's within a strata. And when I talk to them about it, they tell me, well, you can earn $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 with basically the same type of tax system that you have there in the U.S. It's like when you get to $10 million and $15 million that you really get nailed, and that money just goes to the other end. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the problems so far has been the sort of ability to explain that to people here and not use like a boogeyman term that scares everybody away from kind of a little bit better system.
Yeah.
Like nobody here actually puts the term democratic in front of the boogeyman term. So the democratic part is huge. Right. I'm still electing representatives, who are like me and supposed to go to Congress and represent me. But I'm not going to I have some kind of a safety net.
Yeah. There's a whole host of stuff you just brought up there. So that's a big issue. I thought of one more, the third issue that's facing the world. I actually think this is probably an unpopular opinion, but I actually think social media is a scourge. I think it's one of the biggest experiments that we've done in the last 10, 20 years. And it's having an effect on the population that's still misunderstood and could be really harmful. There's good things about, spreading word and getting people involved and showing community gathering. There's good things about social media. But there is a ton of negative. For the most part, human nature takes over, and we spend a lot of time fronting, and it creates I think the upticks in depression, anxiety, drug abuse, all that stuff can be directly correlated to the life that I'm not living, that I'm seeing online.
Right. You know what? More and more, I've been thinking the exact same thing. I just saw an interview with somebody in the paper, and a paper, remember that? Actually, I didn't read it in the paper. I read it online. But nonetheless, it was one of the original inventors of the internet. And he said when they first started to put it together and they started to envision what it could be, when they realized what they could do, they made a list of all the great things that could happen with it and all the bad things that could happen. And he said, so far we've failed because only the bad things have happened. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a good number 3. Yeah,
it's tricky. In a free world, you want to allow as much as you can that doesn't harm the rights of others, but it's very difficult to understand where that line is. If you slow Nancy Pelosi down just enough so she sounds drunk,
right.
What effect did you just create?
Yeah.
It goes on both sides of the political spectrum. It's just
Yeah, we're grabbing somebody's 5 seconds of what somebody said, when they gave a speech.
Right.
I mean, it's completely out of context or whatever, and just making a GIF out of that.
And that's your info, and that's your news. And I feel like newspapers or journalists used to be held to a standard, or they are held to a standard when it comes to publishing news, right? It has to be the truth. But you've got all these people that don't have to apply to those standards, and we're still getting our news from that, and yeah, it's messy.
Yeah, it's in its infancy, and sooner or later going to have to be regulated.
It is in its infancy.
We have a deregulation sort of government in place, and now they're starting to realize, oh my God, maybe there's some effect to regulation.
That's right.
Well, okay, thank you, Adam. Thanks for taking the time, and thank you, everyone, for listening. This is kind of by far our most interesting podcast, depending on what we decide to keep and throw out. Remember, everybody out there, pay attention, because we just might be talking about your business the next time we do this. So thank you very much, and we'll be talking to you soon.
Thank you, Lee. Thanks.